DuckTalks is part of Res TV's network of podcasts. Check out res.tv for other great podcasts.
Hi, this is Doofus, and you're listening to DuckTalks. Didn't know we could, did ya?
It's the week of Wednesday, March the 27th, and you're listening to episode 64 of DuckTalks. Hey there, and welcome to DuckTalks. I'm one of your hosts. My name's Mitch. I've got Pirate Steven joining me tonight.
Ahoy there.
And we're going to have a great episode for you this week. We took kind of a break. It probably felt different for the listeners than it did for us, because our break actually was last week, but we put out an episode last week because I was so far behind on getting the last episode out. Episode 63 was meant to be a week before, but, you know, things happen in life. We try to keep on a schedule, but it doesn't always work out.
But that doesn't, I mean, we've got a lot of news to cover, and it's fun covering the news even when there's not an episode of the new show out.
Yeah, and anytime we take a little bit of a break, it feels like we get overloaded with news. So we're glad to be back and covering this, just making sure everyone's up to speed on what's going on in the duck community. We've got, looking at this episode, just kind of looking at the notes, we're going to talk about Disney Channel's Fan Fest for 2019, Lego DuckTales minifigures, IDW's DuckTales number 19, and that's like a small portion of this episode, because the majority of the episode is going to be our conversation with a Disney historian about his new book chronicling the Disney afternoon.
That is so cool. We've heard about this book for almost a year now, and it's very exciting. Disney puts out this really awesome Disney Deluxe Edition hardcover books, and it's like the ultimate coffee table books for any Disney fan. And the Disney Afternoon, right up our alley. It's going to be a very much must-own book, and I can't wait to hear more about it tonight.
Yeah, we've been here, like you said, we've been hearing about it for a little while from different people. We weren't exactly sure who was involved with it, but we did come across it on Amazon, and you got on the horn, started reaching out to people, and we were able to get in touch with the author. So that will be later in this episode. Before we get to all of that, let's take a moment and talk about some news that I know you're excited about. MegaCon Orlando 2019.
MegaCon Orlando, my backyard. My backyard's Walt Disney World, but MegaCon is going to be. They have every May in Orlando, and I think they have one in Tampa later in the fall. But we finally have some. I was kind of bummed that Don Rosa wasn't going to be there like he was last year. But hey, we got some pretty darn good people coming. We got Joe Caramagna from the DuckTales comic. It's going to be here. I've talked to him so many times online and on Twitter. I can't wait to finally meet him. And James Silvani is going to be here from the Darkwing Duck comic and many other things you know him from. You'll hear us talk about him or share his artwork all the time. I always say if he is at any convention that you go to, you need to get a commission from him or visit his booth or check out his sketchbooks. He is a treat to meet, and his artwork is fantastic.
And he's got a new sketchbook that he's put out this year. I think there's only been a few conventions that he has had it available, and he says he believes he'll have some at MegaCon, so we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, so if you were going to MegaCon Orlando, if you were from the Orlando area or beyond, let me know. We might have some kind of DuckTalks meetup or something, because I'll be there for sure, at least 2 of the days. And I'm trying to talk Mitch into coming. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm working on that. No promises at the moment, but it'd be a lot of fun for sure. This week, we've already had people asking us if we were going, so hopefully we can get that meetup going, whether I make it or not. I hope you all have a good time, and pick me up a sketchbook if I don't make it. Also on the news docket for this week's episode, Disney Channel Fan Fest 2019. Now, when this happened in 2018, it was a pretty big deal. It kind of caught us off guard as far as following the event, there was a lot of things going on at the event, but the main thing that we ended up spending a lot of time talking about was the live read-through of one of the scripts, because it was a script that hadn't aired yet. And so the cast of DuckTales was there reading. I know Frank has answered, he's been asked, what's going on? Can you tell us anything? And he said it's not all ironed out yet. We don't know everything. They're still planning, because they're sharing the stage with other animated shows this year. But we will definitely be following it.
Yeah, last year they had it. It was, I believe, the first weekend of May last year. And that's when the big DuckTales coming to Disney Channel push really happened. So it was perfect timing for the Fan Fest at Disneyland. Here we got it the last weekend of April, which is still good since DuckTales is returning in May. But it seems like, just reading the guest list and things, it seems more aimed at, hey, Descendants 3 is going to be coming out this summer and a couple other new shows. So it's probably not going to be as DuckTales centric as last year's big event. And like Mitch said, that table read was incredible. It's on YouTube. We have a blog out there that covers that. So definitely check that out, because it is just a fun watch. And we don't know which celebrities are going to be there, but if there are DuckTales celebrities, they also had last year like a meet and greet type thing where if you stood in line and got a wristband, you got to meet them and get autographs. So definitely something that we'll keep you updated on as more information is released.
Those autograph posters, and I'm trying to remember if there was anything else. I think it was mostly posters. They're still on eBay, and they're still expensive. Because David Tennant was there last year.
Yeah, David Tennant, that's a big deal. He's also going to be at MegaCon Orlando, too. So if anybody wants to make the trip there, Scrooge will be there.
And we'll cover, if there's any more news that comes out of that as far as who's going to be there, we'll be talking about it as the weeks roll on. This week, let's see, this is the 27th, and it's Wednesday, so it's actually today for us. IDW's DuckTales number 19 came out. This was an issue. I almost called it an episode. I do that every time. It's that good, people. This issue, we were pretty excited about it just based on the cover. There was a lot of buzz online because you have a cover that shows Glomgold in a Scrooge outfit. He's like cosplaying Scrooge or something. We didn't know what was going on. We just knew that he was going to be wearing the top hat, carrying a cane. It's a different cane. I guess it's still his cane. Anyway.
It's kind of funny because I'm a couple issues behind on the comic because I've been just reading them from the trade paperbacks. But I was telling Mitch, do we have a copy out of this? Because I want to read this, because that cover with Flint Hart dressed as Scrooge was hilarious. And I had to read that story right away. And it does feel like it's a very funny issue, and it feels like one of the episodes. So definitely, if you haven't jumped into the comics yet, it's a good time to do it, and check that issue out because that comes out this week.
Yeah, great issue. And also, issue 20 is scheduled to come out in April. However, it looks like the comic is at least taking a break in May, and issue 21 will not be released in May. I have confirmed that through the previews and with my local comic book store. We do not yet know if it will be back in June. If you enjoy issue 19, and we know you will if you give it a chance, because it really is great. It's a lot of fun. If you enjoy it, let IDW know that you're enjoying this book. A lot of times they don't, they're just looking at numbers. They don't get feedback. And man, I've looked at the numbers. DuckTales is doing pretty good. I'd be surprised if we're not back in June and this is just a break.
Yeah, whenever you see IDW saying that new comics are coming, a lot of the times they use a DuckTales picture to promote the comics that are coming out that week or that month. So I feel like that's a good sign. I don't know numbers of how well they're selling or whatnot, but definitely y'all need to jump in there because it is a really good read, and it feels so much like the show.
Read details in these comics before we learned about them in the show. Like, we learned more about Della. We saw Della with Donald and Scrooge in the earlier issues. And then we also saw Donald and the boys and their relationship in the earliest issues. And ever since they've gone to the full, because at one point there were like 2 stories per issue. And in the last, I don't know, it's been like 4 or 5 issues now. They've just been longer stories. I feel like the comic has really gone up a huge notch. And I thought it was good before, but it's even better now. I love the longer format. And this story reads, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of laughs throughout it. If you like Glom Gold and you like Launchpad, you're going to enjoy this issue. And the whole gang's there, so check it out. Local comic book stands. If you don't find it there, go to another comic book shop. If you decide you want it digitally, you can get it at Amazon or Comixology. There's other places as well. That's just where the places we use. Let's see. Moving on, because we have a phone call in a few minutes. We're excited about that. Moving on, Lego minifigures. Now, this is the Disney Series 2 minifigures. These are blind bags. Series 1, I remember that came out. Wasn't that a while back? That's not last year, right?
No, I believe it was 2016 is when Series 1 came out. It was very popular. They had them all over the place. I got a lot of them from Toys R Us, so we'll see how that goes this go around. But I did collect them. It's a really great series. It had 18 different Disney characters, including Donald Duck and Daisy, which... if you're getting the DuckTales ones, you might as well go ahead and try to find those on eBay.
Yeah, I've already been shopping.
Or try to catch up on Series 1 because, yeah, it's a great collection. And for like you can find the packs between $3.99 and $4.99 in stores, and that's a great deal for a Disney character minifigure, I feel.
Yeah, and this series looks really great. What really got us excited is on the front row. I think the front row were the most exciting figures for me, followed by that Mickey and Minnie in the second row. But yeah, if you've not seen our post or seen this online, this series will include a Scrooge McDuck, a Huey, Dewey, and Louie, as well as Chip and Dale. Now, Chip and Dale are not Rescue Rangers. They're classic Chip and Dale, but I still think it's very cool to have.
Yeah, I would love to see somebody come out with a custom like Dale shirt, Lego piece to put on there to make him Chip and Dale, Rescue Ranger Dale.
Yep.
But this is a great collection. The DuckTales ones are classic DuckTales. So it's Huey, Dewey, and Louie in their red, blue, and green shirts and matching hat, and Scrooge McDuck in his blue shirt, and they come with each one of these characters comes with accessories. So Huey has the Junior Woodchuck guidebook and a compass. It looks like Scrooge has a cane and his number one dime. Louie has a flashlight, and Dewey has a slingshot. So, and that's just the DuckTales ones. I mean, there's so many other great characters. It's going to be a very popular series. We did find out from somebody that has received a case of these minifigures. If people are interested, a lot of people are like, you know what, because you could totally feel the characters inside. I feel like I have good feel abilities when I buy a blind bag, and these are blind bags, so you don't know who you're going to get. But someone that bought a case or got a review case said that, and I might as well give the names. The Brick Fan is the website they got a set sent earlier to them. I tried to get Lego to send us a set. They're like, yeah, hope you have fun buying them. But I thought that was a funny one. Mm-hmm. And where was I going with that?
We're just not Lego status yet.
We're not Lego status.
That's okay though, because we're going to buy them. That was my response to them.
when you buy a case, if you're like, you know what, I was buy a case of them, you'll get 2 complete sets of the 18 characters that are in here, and then you'll get 3 of some and 4 of some to complete the box. I don't know how many exact packs come in a case, but it did say that Huey, Dewey, and Louie are the rarest in the box. So if you buy a case or you see a case in the store, there's only 2 Hueys, 2 Louies, and 2 Deweys in the whole case.
No chance of an additional duplicate.
No. So I know I have to buy at least 3 sets of the DuckTales ones because my kids have already told me that I was buying them that, and so I'm going to have to find a second case. So it's gonna be hard, especially if these have been felt around with and picked out the characters. So
how much does a case typically go for on these? Any idea? Like just like rough number?
Well, I mean, they sell them for, so if they're $4 a pack, so
okay.
I don't know how many packs. So they just multiply it.
We're talking retail. I got you.
Right? Yeah, retail. So yeah. It's very exciting. It was when I saw that, when one of my friends sent me the image. It was definitely one of those DuckTales, wait, what? Moments. Because this is something that everybody would dream of, but they're really going to come out with DuckTales Lego? I mean, where's my Scrooge money bin Lego set? That would be incredible.
Yeah, the limousine.
Yeah, so this is. I know they come out with a Steamboat Willie set this month or April as well,
right? And
that's gonna be popular. So I was kind of weirded out seeing a Steamboat Willie, Minnie, and Mickey in this Series 2 set, but yeah, this is great. People are gonna love this.
I have read that the Minnie and Mickey are different from this set and the Steamboat Willie set because that's like an $80 set with a moving toy or Lego toy.
Yeah, they did that. They did that with when the Cinderella Castle, the $400 or however many dollars that set was.
Yeah.
They have different versions of some of the other characters that we got in this Series 1 set. I think it had a different Daisy and a different Minnie and things like that.
Yeah, I saw someone doing a review on the Steamboat Willie set, and they kept commenting on the fact that Mickey and Minnie have silver paint apps, and they just thought it was really cool. The ones in this series, the minifigure series, will not have the silver paint. Like it's just black and white and gray, no silver. So that the figures that came with the more expensive Steamboat Willie set are more special.
Yeah, and I've already requested from TT Games, the one that makes the Lego games, that we need a DuckTales Lego video game. I didn't get any. I had a lot of fans say, "Yeah, we do," and I got a lot of retweets and likes, but I haven't heard from the company if they liked my idea or not.
Yeah, a Disney afternoon game would be a lot of fun too.
Sure. Yeah, they did a Incredibles game last year, and it had a couple of the other Pixar franchises included with that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if they did a Disney one or a DuckTales one, that's like printing money.
Yes.
TT Games, that's like printing money. Get yourself a money press and get that game out there.
Yeah, we may pick up the Lego Movie 2 sometime in the near future, and I've looked at some of that gameplay, and it's very much like the what was the sandbox game, the building game, Lego
Worlds.
Lego Worlds. That's it, Lego Worlds. Yeah, so there's some of the mechanics of Lego Worlds that have moved over to their regular games. I don't know if the Incredibles game included it too, but I thought it was really cool that they've added some of that building component and stuff to it. But yeah, that absolutely is something that I'd be interested in. I'd pre-order that definitely, and I will be searching for these figures. I'll have to have a set of the DuckTales figures. Lexi will have to have a set of the DuckTales figures, and I'm pretty sure we'll be buying a third one as well.
Right. And Susie might want one too, so who knows?
You never know.
Yeah, so they're supposed to come out around May 1st, so might hit earlier in some places, might be that May 1st date, but we'll definitely let you know when we see them, and we'll do a review on them.
As we collect them. Well, also, I know in the past, and maybe they've gotten better at this, but I know in the past there have been ways to distinguish the bags or to, key components to feel for. We'll talk about that some too.
Yeah, you got to feel for their accessory, whatever it is. So definitely,
especially the nephews.
If you bought one, they have like a little, table of contents or a map that show you all of the different Lego minifigure possibilities you could get, and you can see their accessories, and definitely use that as your guide, as your field guide to look for the rest of them. We want
want to welcome Jake S. Friedman to the podcast. Now, Jake is an author, an artist, an ex-animator, and an animation historian. Jake, thank you for joining us on DuckTalks.
Hey, my pleasure. We've
been excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming. This book was something that we've been looking for a while. We had heard rumors that there were some people possibly working on a book. We didn't know who, but we talked to, I think Tad Stones mentioned it at one point, that he knew that there was a book in the works. So we're definitely excited to have an opportunity to talk with you, talk about your fandom, and talk about this book.
Cool. I'm happy to talk about it too.
Where we thought we'd start, and we already kind of talked about, you asked us this before we got started, but what we wanted to ask you first of all is, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, and also, but we'd like for you to include your history with the Disney Afternoon. Like, did you grow up watching it? Is it something you watched later?
Well, I'm glad you asked. If there's one thing I can talk about nonstop, it's myself. So I was born in 1981, which I figure is like a primo time to be born, to be a fan of the Disney Afternoon. Like, there's like a couple years before and a few years after, but 1981 is like the sweet spot of.
Oh yeah, I'm a 1981 as well.
Cool.
Sure.
So
I'm an 82, so I'm just outside of that sweet spot.
Well, my two brothers were 1982, and I just brought them up with me. So for me, what I realized, like, I always loved Disney. My parents had the Disney Channel. I don't know why, because it was a luxury that they had no reason to be able to afford. They were both school teachers. And I asked my dad today, actually. I called him up specifically to ask him, Dad, why did you decide to pay for a subscription to the Disney Channel back in the early 80s? And he said, because you loved Disney and we wanted to make you happy. I said, He said, did it make you happy? I said, yeah, you might say that. So that, combined with my dad's VCR, back in the 80s, it wasn't very common to have one. We just collected tapes and tapes and tapes of Disney animation, shorts, the features that the Disney Channel would broadcast. And I would just watch these nonstop. I just grew up loving Disney animation. And classic animation in general, the classic Warner Brothers as well, MGM, Tom and Jerry. But there was something about Disney animation that that touched me deeply. Something about the gentleness, or about kind of like the little guy trying to get ahead. That was what all of these shorts were about. They were about like people succeeding in spite of themselves. And I was always short as a kid. I was very shy. I kind of saw myself as Mickey Mouse, maybe. By the time Gummy Bears aired, I'm going to give you a bit of pathos. I actually put this in the book. When I was around 5, our dog died. And I loved this dog. Her name was Tootsie. And she was a beagle. She was older than me. She was sort of my parents' pre-kid, the training kid. Mm-hmm. And my heart was broken. I felt like there were things this dog understood about me that no human could understand. And by the time I was 9, we finally got our second dog, another beagle, a beagle named Peanut. She was a rescue beagle. And in those years between, I guess, 1986 and 1990, that was like the initial run of the Disney Afternoon. It was like Gummy Bears, DuckTales, Rescue Rangers, Tailspin, anthropomorphic animals, filling in the void where my absence of a four-legged furry friend was. And I was able to sort of find connection maybe in these anthropomorphic characters. And even to this day, I will find anthropomorphic animals more exciting to watch on cartoons than pretty much anything else. My brothers were into like G.I. Joe. I was not. They were into Ghostbusters. I was kind of a little bit, but not that much. It was really, give me a duck, give me a chipmunk, or give me a bear. Give me some dogs that talk and wear clothes, and I was a happy camper. So that's where that started. Around 1990, I started taping these shows and pausing them and looking at the credits and seeing the names of the people who made them. And I was memorizing voice casts at this time. It was tricky because they didn't put down who played which character for the Disney Afternoon, unlike Tiny Toons, unlike Animaniacs. But it was cool to see all these names and figure, like, these are the humans who make these shows possible. So here I am. I can talk to these people. Like, in writing this book, it's really my dream realized, from being a fanboy to getting a chance to tell these people how much I appreciate what they've created together. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and I think you've already kind of touched on my next question. Tell us and the listeners, what is the Disney Afternoon book that you've written? Like, what all are you covering? Like, you're chronicling the beginnings. How far does it go into? Just kind of give us the overview of what the book is.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. It goes far deeper than I ever thought it did. When I started this book, I thought it was just going to be starting at the Gummy Bears. I was so wrong. This starts back in the 70s, back with the record company.
Oh, wow.
And the guy who ran the record company at Disney, his name was Gary Kreisel. He was very young. He was kind of a prodigy. And the person he hired to be like the head, I guess, producer at the record company was a man named Jim Magon. And Gary and Jim had gone to college together. And Jim was like also a young prodigy, kind of an expert in creating, like, for lack of a better term, radio plays in college. And Gary just loved business and loved art. And they began. If you had a Disney record, or even like a tape, like a book on tape, or what was it called? They were called read-alongs, where you buy a book that comes with a tape, an audio tape, or I actually had some with like records in sleeves, and it would say, "You'll know when to turn the page when you hear the chimes ring like this. Let's begin now." You know those? Does this ring a bell for either?
Yeah.
So these guys were creating them. And Disney had them for years before, but under Jim Magon, they actually became proper radio plays. There were orchestras, there were sound-alike actors, like actors they would hire who sounded kind of like the actors from the original Disney films, you know. They had sound effects. They were proper radio plays. And Gary went on to, at the same time, turn Disney Apparel into a very productive line. And by the time like 1982, 83 started happening, by the time the Disney Channel became a thing, he was pitching to Ron Miller, the head of the company, who was also Walt Disney's son-in-law, an idea for, hey, let's put Disney animation on television because we're going to miss the boat. And back then, it's hard for us to imagine now, especially with all the wide array of iterations of animated Mickey Mouse. You know, there's like Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and there's the Paul Rudish shorts on YouTube. They're getting like 4 million hits per video. But back then, like, Mickey Mouse was sacrosanct. No one wanted to risk diluting the legacy that Walt had created. And it wasn't just Mickey either. It was animation as a medium. So Gary was saying to Ron Miller, let's start out by creating some animated specials. TV shows, that's crazy. It would be ridiculous to make animated shows. Disney had not produced like animated television shows. They produced animation for their live action shows. There was like Ludwig von Drake and The Wonderful World of Color and stuff, but Disney had not jumped onto the bandwagon of producing animated shows. So Gary Kreisel is like, let's do this. Ron Miller's like, you know, we just created Touchstone Pictures, but this is like the adult brand of Disney films. I'm feeling adventurous. Let's do it, but let's take baby steps, because there are a lot of old timers still around who are constantly looking over their shoulder asking, what would Walt do? What would Roy do? So baby steps. And Gary says, okay, baby steps. So he he talks to someone at Consumer Products. He's like the top artist at Consumer Products, called Carson Van Austen, who's now a Disney legend. He also passed away, sadly, a couple of years ago, but he received the award before he passed away. God bless Disney. And Carson Van Austen, who was a young man at the time, as an artist, previously, I'm giving you so much background information. Previously, he had been a rock star. Okay, cool. He was a rock star who kind of gave up rocking in order to kind of pursue illustration. So now he's working at the Consumer Products line, and he tells Gary Kreisler, he says, yeah, I have this idea of combining two different types of animals into a new hybrid animal. I think that would be a cool series of children's books. I'm calling it Jumble Isle. And Gary's like, that's cool. Let's turn that into a special. And at the same time, he goes to Hasbro. He says, hey, Hasbro, it's 1982, 1983 right now. All these toy companies are making TV show spinoffs. There's like Transformers, G.I. Joes, and GoBots and Smurfs, and like, let's work together. And Hasbro says, okay, what do you got? Gary says, I have this idea of two animals smushed together. Hasbro says, hold on, let us show you what we have. And they show Gary the Wuzzles. And with the Wuzzles, they have like Hoppopotamus and Butterbear, and also Pandeaver and some other characters we'll never see. And Gary says, okay, let's not sue each other, and instead let's work together. And Hasbro's like, yeah, let's work together. This is great. And collaboratively, they put the Wuzzles on like a green light to make a couple specials. While this is happening, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but Ron Miller is kind of pushed out. And who's brought in? Michael Eisner, Frank Wells. So Michael Eisner, so that kind of puts all this, the whole company kind of like is screeched to a halt. Michael Eisner has all these different aspects of the company that he wants to start anew under his new guidance. Mm-hmm. And he tells Gary and Michael Webster, who I haven't even had a chance to talk about yet, but Michael Webster is a producer, animation director, producer / animation studio head, who Gary had brought in to help make this happen. So now it's just Gary and Mike Webster. Mike Webster is like 10 years older than Gary. Gary Kreisel is 34. Michael Webster is 45. Michael Webster has animated the Jolly Green Giant. He's been in charge of like Tony the Tiger. He knows how to produce animation better than like really impressive animation. You look at these the old animated commercials, and they're well done, even for a 30-second commercial. These are well done commercials. So Michael Webster's secret was farming it overseas. That's how to get it done well and to get it done cheaply, but he knows how to make that sort of studio run. Michael Webster was taking a huge risk in abandoning his career as an ad man to work on this prospective idea for Disney television, even just specials. And he was very hesitant to even sign his name on the contract to work for Disney. So Gary Kreisel, age 34, is really has to, really sell the idea to this 45-year-old man who's been working in advertising, and Mike Webster, to say, you're going to be my top dog under this. Under me to produce these specials and really create Disney animated television. So now Miller's out, Eisner's in. Eisner calls for a meeting on a Sunday in his house. And Eisner says, Gary, bring Mike Webster and some other creative folks. We're going to talk about, animated television. So Gary Kreisel brings in Jim Magon, the guy who was working on those read-alongs for years. Like, he was very successful with that. And he brings in Tad Stones. And Tad Stones, he was kind of like an artist jack of all trades. Like, he had a hand in a lot of various things, and he was very, very, very talented, but they couldn't quite find a place for him to land. and they thought maybe this is where this incredibly talented guy belongs. So it's these guys, and Eisner's sitting with Frank Wells, and Eisner says, we're going to start a Disney television division. And Gary says, great, we started some specials. And Eisner says, no, not specials. We're going to create 4 series, 4 animated series. And they're like, what? You mean like a miniseries? No, we're going to create entirely like a full series, 13 episode, entire season series, 4 of them. Gary's like, 4. Eisner's like, yeah, 4. Let's get started. Gary's like, how about 1? We don't even have a department to do this. And Eisner's like, how about 2? Gary's like, okay, 2. We'll create 2 series for you out of nothing. We don't have a studio. We don't have a crew. We don't have equipment. We'll create two independent series from the ground up, entire seasons of each of these series. And so that was the beginning of Wuzzles and Gummy Bears. The idea of turning Jumble Isle through Hasbro Wuzzles, that those specials became the series of Wuzzles. And Eisner, if you heard the story that Eisner wanted a show based on his kid's favorite candy, that's true. His kid came back from summer camp loving gummy bears, and he said, my kid loves this thing. Make me a show about gummy bears. Goodbye. And they left.
Yeah.
And
that's one of my favorite. Sure. Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories. But I didn't know all of the preemptive. I didn't know it was already in the works and then kind of put on hold when Eisner came in. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Ron Miller, I have to give him credit where it's due. He just passed away. Mm-hmm. And he was, it's very easy to paint him in sort of like a black or white thing, that like he wasn't Walt. And I think he would be the first to admit that he had some learning to do about the animation art form and how animation worked. His background was really in live action. And that's how like the Touchstone Pictures label came out. Like he really succeeded in that, and doing Splash. I mean, that movie still holds up. So he was really at the behest of the other old timers at the studio when it came to innovation. And God bless him for wanting to move forward on television, even if it's in the form of specials, a couple specials. Eisner brought in Katzenberg just a few months after he came in. And Katzenberg's motto was faster, better, cheaper. And that was sort of like, that was ingrained in everyone's mind. He would just keep saying to everyone, do it faster, better, and cheaper. And people worked. These are young people in their 20s and 30s. They were working their butts off trying to create basically a television animation studio from nothing. And that's where I just left you right now, is the end of the first chapter of the book. It's like it ends right where the beginning of Gummy Bears and Wuzzles begins. So
it's a crazy story. Absolutely crazy story.
Yeah, totally crazy. None of this should have existed, and it should not have had the success that it did, because it kind of defies everything we know about reality. And yet, I guess we have to credit Eisner for the vision, and Gary Kreisel, Jim Magon for making this thing happen. Jim Magon brought in Art Vitello, and together, they push Gummy Bears forward. And you have Ken Kuntz and David Weimers, who were brought in right after Wuzzles began, so they could start turning Wuzzles into something that wasn't just kitschy, but something that had character and something that had adventures and some kind of world building. And Kuntz and Weimers became the Disney Afternoon's first writing team. So they didn't write the first episode of Wuzzles, but they wrote, I think, of the 13, they wrote at least 10 of them, like episodes 4 through 13. And in that process, they brought in voice actors like Bill Scott, the famous voice of Bullwinkle Moose, who was also doing Gruffy on the Wuzzles. They brought in like couple members of the cast of Laugh-In. And they brought in a very young actress that no one had ever heard of, who'd never worked in the industry before, named Tress MacNeille. It was Tom Ruzicka, who was the ad hoc producer of the show, who brought in Tress MacNeille, and The Wuzzles was her first show. And now she's, a living legend.
Yeah, Wuzzles definitely had the better merchandise, and now that makes sense that you were talking about the Hasbro tie-in there with that show.
Yeah, and if you go on YouTube, what's weird is that you can find the commercials for these Wuzzle toys that were made before the show aired. So they're using voices that don't quite match up, and they're advertising characters that never appear on the show. It's because they were advertising these toys, and they were creating these commercials before the show was a thing. And actually, Art Vitello, who became like the co-showrunner for Gummy Bears, he was animating on one of these Wuzzle commercials when he was hired off to work at Disney. So there you go. It's all tied together.
Yeah, I can't believe they only made. I have such vivid memories of Wuzzles. I can't believe they only made 13 episodes of it, and it's definitely something I hope they bring back in the Disney Plus era of streaming.
Yeah, I always liked it too. They called that high concept. That's Hollywood talk for a good idea. It was a high concept show. And I love that, you have Stan Freberg's sardonic voice, introducing each episode. What's funny is that they had a harder and harder time shoehorning that narrator voice into each episode. They were stuck with it because that's how the series began. But then they realized that it just ate up time and it didn't add anything to the show. It's funny to watch it now as an adult and hear Stan Freberg's kind of like cynical, almost embittered voice. That's sort of like the character that he was playing. It's kind of sardonic and a little bit condescending when he talks about the Land of Oz. But it's like a flavor that a saccharine children's show like that needs to kind of like add some flavor and spice to it. After the first season was over, they didn't know it was canceled yet. Coons and Weemers they give out plushes of the characters to the actors who play those characters at the wrap party, and Stan Freberg's there, and he's like, "I don't suppose there's a narrator doll." And that was their experience with Stan Freberg.
Nice. Now, who did the theme song for Gummy Bears? Because I feel like that's the real MVP of all of the Disney Afternoon.
Oh, you think so?
That song is definitely my favorite, I think, from all of them. They're all classics, and I listen to them in a car on the way to work every day and on the way back. So, but Gummy Bears, I feel like is my jam.
That is the Silvershires, Patty and Michael Silvershire. It's a heck of a theme, and it's just they were inspired to do that theme. They were really struggling with it. They had done, I mean, if you were born in 1981, you might remember the Donald Duck's birthday theme for his 50th birthday.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, we had that on tape, and that was just so gosh darn catchy. And the Silvershires had written that. They'd written some stuff on a couple of these records. They wrote a bunch of songs on these records. They written this. They won out on getting the job to write this theme song, but they were really struggling with it for months. Patty and Michael were a married couple who were also a creative team, and they just were at their wits' end for months trying to make a song that would win over the execs, particularly Gary. Gary believed in them, but they just kept trying, and they just kept hearing, no, not quite. No, you're not there yet. Finally, Michael's like, okay, let's sit down. Let's have a conversation with Gary. Gary, just tell us what you're looking for. What's something that you want? And I'm like, I wasn't there. I'm paraphrasing, and I may be, adding a little flourish in the storytelling. So I say that blanket statement for everything that I say.
Right.
But Gary's like, okay, let me play. No, actually, no, there wasn't anything to play. He said, think of that Robin Hood show from your childhood, Robin Hood and His Merry Men, or no, The Adventures of Robin Hood. I'll be honest with Steve and Mitch. I don't remember the name of this show. I'd written it down. I did not grow up on this show, but it was a Robin Hood show, a black and white Robin Hood show from the old days, and Gary said, make a theme song that sounds like the theme song of this Robin Hood show. And if you listen to this show, it'll sound like you'll hear echoes of the Gummy Bear theme. You hear the trumpet fanfare, bum, 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 bum. And it feels like you're ready to like rush into battle from the forest. So they created the Gummy Bears theme from that.
So that's really like the first chapter of the book is Wuzzles and Gummy Bears. Are there like a lot of behind the scenes pictures and things like that to go along with the story?
Oh yeah. Well, first let me specify. The first chapter is like everything leading up to Gummy Bears Wuzzles. I called it Where It All Began. And then chapter 1 is Gummy Bears Wuzzles. Chapter 2, DuckTales. For those of us who have this, who are able to remember the order of the Disney afternoon shows, that's how I labeled the chapters. So, cool. But I have a whole thick chapter like leading up to how that first series even started. So
do you cover?
Yes, there are photos. There are tons of photos. To answer your question, sorry to talk over you, but
that's awesome. So with the photos, and so I would imagine, is there any concept art and things from the production of the shows?
You will see concept art by folks like Willie Ito. Willie Ito was creating some stuff back at the first concepts of Gummy Bears. Were leaned heavily on the candy theme. So. They lived in a land not called Camelot. It was called Chocolat. And the character that eventually became Kevin, he looks a little bit more not quite Kevin. He's a little bit more of a knight. And originally there were just male gummy bears. There was Dummy Gummy, who was dressed like a jester. There was Tummy Gummy was a male. He was the chef. And there was a villain called Licorice Whip. And a lot of weird stuff that the ogres were not nearly as appealing, if you can call an ogre appealing, but they,
but it's a cool concept for an ogre.
Yeah.
It's iconic for sure.
Now, absolutely. But the ogres in the concept art did not quite look the way they do now. They looked a little bit more, I don't know. I'm not sure how to describe it. More fierce, more like the thing of childhood nightmares.
Yeah. I
wouldn't show it to my 6-year-old self. And there's also, what's interesting is that they were given a note to create female characters. They were given a note from the network. So that's where Sunny came from. And there are all these sketches by Willie Ito and other concept artists who were experimenting with like what a female medieval bear would look like. So from those concepts came Sunny. From the concepts of turning. I misspoke when I talked about Tummy. Tummy was always Tummy. Tummy was always the fat one who ate a lot. He had a single tooth on his bottom jaw that the show did away with eventually. But Grammy came from, I forget. Now I'm drawing a blank on the character's name. But this chef style gummy bear, who was he had like a sort of like long mustache, like you might imagine like a French chef would have. When they were conceiving of turning a character into a female, you kind of see the evolution of the design of Grammy. You have like a cowl or sort of like a head covering that, medieval nurses or nursemaids or had when they worked in the castle. And that cowl sort of evolved into the hairstyle that Grammy ended up having. And I thought that was really interesting. Cubby was the same from the beginning to the end, except his original name was Bubble, like Bubble Gummy. And Zummy was originally called the Grape, and he was purple like a grape, and he was called like the Grape Gummy. And Dummy Gummy, the Jester Gummy, gone forever. Ah, well.
So then they moved into DuckTales, right? How did DuckTales come to be?
It's funny. There are like 3 different origin stories for DuckTales, but the one that, but like the one that's going, like I had to do, when you're a researcher talking to people who were there and you're relying on a combination of oral history and scant records, you really have to triangulate your research. And I worked really hard trying to get this story down. Because a lot of people want to take credit for DuckTales, because a lot of people had a hand in the creation of DuckTales. But the story that I'm sticking to is there was and you'll have to forgive me, I'm not really good with names, but there was a Star Wars producer who requested a hardbound collection of Carl Barks Scrooge comics. He was like, hey, Disney, can we make one of these? Because I'd buy one, and I would tell my creative Hollywood elite friends to buy one. And so Disney's like, okay. And they create this, I guess it's 1985-ish, 1984, beautiful leather-bound Uncle Scrooge collection. And that gave Gary Kreisel the idea, hey, if the creative elite are really serious about these comics that I myself was into back when I was a young kid, he was saying to himself, then maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's not just for just people like me who ended up loving Disney so much they ended up working at Disney. Maybe it's just for generally a wider audience. Maybe these comics have legs. Maybe we can turn it into something. So Wuzzles just ended. The news that it wasn't going to have a second season just hit. It was kind of unfortunate because it was given the identical time slot as Gummy Bears, just on a different network. So it was like Gummy Bears versus Wuzzles. Only one could win, and it was Gummy Bears. Who knows if Wuzzles had been given a different time slot, we may have had Wuzzles as a Disney afternoon show, and it may have gone on for more than 13 episodes. But so Wuzzles was done, and the writing team of Kuntz and Weimers, they were contacted by Gary Kreisel, and Gary says, I want you to take the Carl Barks comics and expand on it for a 1980s television audience. I want some female characters. I want some world building. I want a title, and I want build this world, create some characters. So Ken Kuntz and David Weimers are sitting together in, I think it was Ken's apartment, and they're like, okay, we need a girl. How about Webbigail Vanderquack? So they come up with Webby. They come up with a bunch of ideas, and then Ken says to David, he says, hey, back when we were pitching ideas across the studios, because they were working in TV animation specifically before they got hired to do the Wuzzles, he said, David, you had this drawing that you kept pitching about an astronaut duck. David said, oh, you mean Launchpad McQuack? And Ken's like, yeah, how about we put him into the show? David's like, well, there's no spaceship in the show. But how about we just make him a pilot, a cargo pilot, a freelance cargo pilot that Scrooge hires? And so Launchpad made his way into the show. And because the show Happy Days with Fonzie was so popular at that time, the name of the haircut that Fonzie had was called a ducktail because of the way it's combed and slicked back and everything. And so they're like, how about we call the show DuckTales but spelled Tales? And so they take all these ideas to Gary, and from what I understand, from what everyone says, Gary would chew on an idea for a while. He would say, this kind of works, go back to the drawing board a little bit, work with that. He wasn't easy to please. He knew what excellence was when he heard it. When these guys came to him with these ideas, instantly he knew it was a go. He loved all of this. He loved the name of the show. He loved the characters. Like it was like lightning in a bottle. And so almost instantly, like they started like getting these comics for research. Gary, I think the next step was selling it to syndicates before they even hired the official writing team, because Kuntz and Weimer's weren't, although they helped come up with some of those ideas, they weren't like the first writing team for the show. But first, the idea of making this show syndicated was extremely novel at that time. It would take a whole lot of work to sell the idea of this original show to all these different syndicates. They would have to produce 65 episodes instead of just 13, which was like insane. This is why when you see a syndicated show, like if you're watching a TV show when you're homesick at school and you're watching like Gilligan's Island or something, or like All in the Family at 2 p.m, it's because they bought a whole package of 65 episodes, which is like what, 4 or 5 seasons? 5 seasons of a show. Well, now like Gary agreed to create 65 episodes of a show that's no one has ever seen before. But they make this pitch, and the syndicates are like, "Yeah, we love it. We'll do it."
There's a lot of Carl Barks fans out there.
Oh yeah. Well, it's easy to locate them now, which is funny because the internet changes so many things. But imagine not knowing who the other fans of a particular niche artist is, or not knowing how many other people enjoy the same thing that you enjoy. It really it was a different world, and it's easy for us to forget that, even though we predate the internet. Us
Right.
80s babies. But that became the beginning of DuckTales.
Now, each chapter of the book, you had said that the first chapter dove into, Wuzzles and Gummy Bears. And then the second chapter is DuckTales. So does each chapter kind of chronicle the show start to finish? Or is it more of a chronological, like they're introduced in this chapter and the story continues for the Disney Afternoon as a whole? Or do you segment it by shows?
I segment it by shows.
Okay,
So,
which would be a lot easier to follow.
Yeah, it's tricky because you have like season 2 of Gummy Bears happening during season 1 of DuckTales, right when they're hiring Ted and Nancy and Patsy Cameron to be the head writers for DuckTales. But it's like, I thought for simplicity's sake, I would kind of sum up whatever happens after the first season in the latter half of that chapter.
Okay.
Because the studio was constantly growing. At first, it was just like one team doing Wuzzles and one team doing Gummy Bears, and then you have a team doing DuckTales, and then they're doing the New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which I mentioned, but I don't really delve into it because it was a Saturday morning show. And they're winning Emmys, and they're producing more and more seasons of this, and they're doing episodes of Gummy Bears even up to Tailspin. Like Gummy Bears lasted for 6 years, 6 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So instead of just bouncing back and forth all the time, I just stuck to one chapter on Gummy Bears, one chapter on DuckTales, and trying to put as much overlap as I could to keep it somewhat chronologically accurate, but I prioritized topic. I prioritized the show over chronology. I did keep dates there so people would be able to figure out what's happening when. But I wanted to illustrate how the studio was growing and how the Disney Afternoon family of characters was growing at the same time.
Does the book follow? You're chronicling the Disney afternoon and the shows. So are you? Is it focused only on the shows, or do you also branch out into? Because I know we already talked about some of Hasbro and everything. Do you branch out into the merchandise and the future? Eventually video games and all that's going on with the shows, or are you focused mainly on the production of the shows?
Oh man, I wish I could have talked about the video games. I had those video games. I had the Disney Adventures digests,
Uh-huh.
I still have the Kellogg's figurines that came in those boxes. I mailed away. I mailed my proofs of purchases away so they could send me the entire sets of these characters. So I wish I could, but I was so strapped for space in the book that I wanted to stick to just the story of the shows and also the artwork that helped inspire the shows. I figured if people wanted to look at pictures of the video games, they could just Google image that online.
Right.
I'm sorry. I just want to add one thing that I did not have room to put in the book.
Okay.
There was a cool thing called this Nintendo Play Place that it was this this like joint marketing program between Nintendo and the Disney Afternoon, where they were going to have this kind of like an art installation that was constantly touring the country, where it was like basically an arcade space that was just DuckTales, the Nintendo game, Rescue Rangers, the Nintendo game, and Tailspin, the Nintendo game. I think they were all Capcom games.
Mm-hmm.
And I have these cool documents from the Disney archives about this Nintendo Play Place, this Capcom Disney Afternoon joint venture. I don't have any photos of it, but I have these designs and I have press releases about it. I was not able to put them in the book. There wasn't any room.
Very cool. We're big fans of the games. I mean, they've been released in the last few years. DuckTales got the remastered version, which is beautiful and a lot of fun, and it has inspired the new show. And then we've also got the Disney Afternoon collection, which was released on current gen consoles, where you've got all those Capcom classics, including a couple sequels.
Oh, cool. Yeah, the Rescue Rangers sequel, it's hard to find. I've never played it. I'd like to one day. I'd like to play the DuckTales sequel as well.
They're both fun. Very fun.
That's cool. I haven't had a chance to play the DuckTales remastered game. I played the original so hard that it literally destroyed the cartridge. It's the only cartridge of all of my Nintendo cartridges that got worn out from overuse. But it was because of the remastered video game. I've been writing for Animation Magazine on and off for many years, and I pitched this idea of interviewing Alan Young to the editor-in-chief of Animation Magazine. So I got a chance. He said yes. I was approved. I contacted Disney/Capcom, and I got a chance to interview Alan Young over the phone back, I think, in 2013, right after he'd finished recording this and right after this came out. He was still sharp, and he was funny and witty. And I just got a chance. It was surreal to talk to someone like Alan Young, who had shaped such a huge part of my childhood. And parts of that interview I was able to put into this book, which the manuscript of this book I began after Alan Young had already passed away. So I had interviews, I had my own personal archives with him. I had my own archival interviews with June Foray and with Chuck McCann. I had interviewed Terry McGovern, the voice of Launchpad, 10 years ago for a local newsletter. And I was able to call upon my own personal archives of these interviews to breathe just a little bit more life and to honor these incredible actors one last time. So you'll see some quotes, some really cool quotes by these folks in the book.
So was this book your idea, or did they come to you asking for you to put this together?
Oh, this was my idea. I've been wanting to write this book for years, man. For years. Don't we all want to write a book like this? It was one of the first things I wanted after I graduated college. This was one of the first side projects that I wanted to do. This was on my aspirational page on my then nascent website. And I never thought, honestly, at the time, I never thought it could happen. But I started building a platform as a writer. And then I think 4 years ago, I started, I mentioned this to a colleague of mine who's also a Disney researcher. And she said, let me give you the name of the folks at Disney Publishing, Disney Editions. And I said, okay. And I sent them an email. I said, what year is it now? 2019. So I think this was back in 2014 at the latest. And I said, hey, folks at Disney Publishing, Disney Editions, how about a book on the Disney afternoon? And they're like, thank you for your interest. We're glad that you're friends with people who we respect, that you can drop names in a very impressive way. We're not at all interested, but check in with us in the future. So every 6 months or so, I would check in. My aunt calls that the drip tactic. I recommend it. You're a drop of water on a rock, slowly, creating a hole in the rock. Every 6 months, I send an email. If you remember me, just asking, interested in a book about a Disney afternoon? I think at the time I created a proper pitch. This 14-page proper Disney afternoon book. I called it the Disney Afternoon: A Television Renaissance, and they actually ended up keeping most of that title. Mm-hmm. And I just pulled some quotes from interviews that I'd already had, like with Alan Young, and I threw together an outline, and I threw together some pictures I pulled off the internet just to give them an idea of what it would be and how I envisioned it. And they're like, this is really, really good. We're not at all interested, but keep checking in with us. And finally, that same colleague friend sent me an email saying, hey, Jake, there's a new DuckTales reboot that's announced. Now might be a good time to contact Disney Publishing again. And so I did, and this time they said yes. And the rest is history.
Well, the timing,
Disney history.
The timing was perfect because at the same time, and it was kind of a slow swell in the beginning until DuckTales came out, there was already kind of this resurgence of Disney Afternoon taking place. And I kind of feel like it might have started with Capcom re-releasing those games and it just coming to the forefront of the culture's mind. But I mean, now we've got so many, Funko's putting out pops and action figures, and there's books that are coming out, for the current DuckTales. But we're also we've got episodes of the shows, of the classic Disney Afternoon shows, finally being released. We finally got the Volume 4 for DuckTales, even though it's not easy to get a hold of yet. But these releases are taking place, and Disney's noticing that the Disney Afternoon was a big deal to us.
Yeah. I don't know if it's the video game itself. I think there are a lot of pieces that play a part in that. Right. I think it's I think folks like us, we were buying up copies. I think the comic books did a significant part of it. There were these DuckTale comics, these new adventures of DuckTales and Darkwing Duck, and crossover between Darkwing and DuckTales that were I think they were a lot of fun. I had bought them.
From Boom Studios.
Yeah, Boom Studios. So those were a lot of fun. It's so delightful to see these figurines that are coming out of shows that haven't been on in 30 years. That's really delightful. It tells me that there's a lasting legacy to these shows, which I always thought. I was talking to my brothers the other day, and they were mentioning these shows by name to some friends of theirs who either didn't have a TV growing up, or maybe they were just 5 years too young. They're like, what's Tailspin? What's Rescue Rangers? I kind of heard of DuckTales, but not really. And I said it to them, I was like, it's like talking to people who never heard of the moon landing. It's like, how could you have missed this significant part of our cultural heritage? But the fact is like, for a lot of people who were born a little bit after 1981, they're getting introduced to these shows through the comics, through these figurines, and through the video games. And from people like us who are just, reiterating how well done these shows were.
a lot of our followers online and listeners to the show, I'm always surprised at the number of people who are younger who are following us, and they didn't catch the shows when they originally aired, or even maybe in their first runs of reruns, but it was much later because the Disney Channel did show a lot of them on their formats throughout the years. But they very fondly remember watching the show as a kid, even though they didn't grow up in the 80s with us. I think it's a testament just to how great the quality of the shows were. I mean, my kids are 8 and 6, and they love to pull out the DVDs and watch these shows.
Oh my God. It's due to folks like you who take an active step in sharing it with the younger generations that keep these shows alive. So, I mean, thank you, man, for helping these shows continue.
Oh, they gave us so much. We couldn't, we've had 60 something episodes of talking about them in the new show. It's something that's, really important to our childhood. And then we just love sharing it with not only our kids, but with others. And it was really fun with the new show, the new DuckTales you just mentioned. It was really fun watching some of the crew, some of the production crew online on Twitter as they started to dive into some of the older shows for influence and stuff. And they were talking about, watching Darkwing Duck for the first time. And it was really cool hearing them because the show holds up really well. One of the things I love, we talk about it a lot on our podcast. We love Darkwing Duck. I mean, we love all the Disney Afternoon, but there's just something special about that show for me anyway. And just it had heart. It had, the Disney heart, but it had that slapstick humor that I enjoyed from Warner Brothers cartoons as well. And it was phenomenal. And then the whole superhero aspect and everything. There's some great stories about how that show came to be and just everything that went into creating it from a single episode of DuckTales.
Yeah. You're talking about the episode where of Double O Duck, where Launchpad is the spy. Right. Yeah. Can you imagine Darkwing Duck without Goslin? Can you imagine the show without the Goslin character? That character was put in for that element of Disney heart where, we have someone to root for, but also there's a level of pathos there. And Disney loves orphans too. So we have Darkwing adopt this kid. I can't imagine, we talk about the slapstick, we talk about the adventure and kind of the shadow style of crime fighting, but it's so quintessentially Disney to know what it feels like to tap into that father-daughter relationship that's, slightly at odds with itself because she didn't grow up with him, but also they love each other and they made a point to hug in every episode. Tad Stone said these characters are going to hug in every episode because these characters, that's the Disney heart. We're going to have warmth in every episode. So we think that, you and I and all of us fans, especially as when we're kids and we're not thinking about it, well, I'll just speak for myself. I would see these shows sort of delivered fully formed, like fire from Mount Olympus. And here I am receiving their gift. But I never once thought about how strategic it was to put each individual character in that relationship dynamic. So you have, same thing in Tailspin. It's Baloo, Rebecca, and Kit. And Jim Magon, who was the showrunner for that show, he said, I knew that I could put these three characters, lock them in a basement, and just have a show because the way these characters would interact with each other would show so much character and create so much drama and humor that we didn't need gimmicks to make this interesting. We just needed true character relationships and heart. So, hearing these people talk about these shows now, 30 years after the fact, really helps me as a fan and also as a creative person understand the the deliberation that goes into creating something like this from scratch.
I don't know if you follow Tad Stones on social media, but he recently, he must be doing some kind of spring cleaning or something, but he found the original Darkwing Duck pitch video, and he posted that on social media. It is amazing. I'll have to send you the link if you haven't seen it.
Oh, please do. I think I missed that. I'm a little bit of a Luddite, I have to be honest with you. But yeah, please do. Send me that link.
And it is him recording from recording a VCR reel. I mean, it's nostalgic in and of itself.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
but it's a really fun pitch.
I'd love to see it. I know that Jim Magon presented the Goof Troop pitch at a Comic-Con at one point or another, and I think Greg Weisman showed the Gargoyles pitch at a Comic-Con at some point. And it's really cool to see, what the executives saw that day. Yeah. The day that they decided to greenlight a project like this. And you'll also see something that's not fully formed. It's like there are some changes to be made along the way. Maybe a character is not quite how it's going to end up looking, But God bless the executives, they know enough to see the potential in this. Even if it's not 100% the way it's going to be, they know we're almost there, and I'm going to greenlight this and trust that this creative team is going to take us there.
Now, do you have? You said there's chapters on the different shows. Do you have a whole chapter devoted to Jim Cummings?
That would not be fair. That would not be fair to the other talented voice actors.
He'd make a good follow-up book if you.
That is 100% true. I agree with you. I got a chance to interview him in detail. We had like. Most interviews took like 1 hour. I think we did ours in like two sections. So I think we spoke for at least 2 hours, maybe 3. And he told me some really cool things about, honestly, for anyone who listens to podcasts or goes to the conventions, I do not know what he told me in the book he has not told previously. I do listen to podcasts. I do listen to some of these convention interviews that I can find online. But he still told me things I'd never heard anywhere else. Things about Paul Winchell's final wish for him. Actually, I think he said that on Rob Paulson's podcast, but he said it to me anyway, so I can't not put it in. Paul Winchell was the original voice of Tigger, and he was doing Tigger for a couple of years on The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh when Jim Cummings was doing Pooh. And Paul Winchell would sometimes just like take a day not coming in for Tigger. Jim Cummings will come in and do Tigger. And then when Paul Winchell was dying, he tells Jim, "Take care of my little buddy for me." And it's so beautiful and sad and such an incredible honor and a gift that Jim was able to receive that directly from the voice originator. How often does a character actor get to have that gift? And so he's been playing Tigger ever since, up to and including the Christopher Robin feature film. But he has stories about so Jim has been doing impersonations of Louis Prima for most of his life. He had traveled. He's from Ohio, but he traveled to New Orleans just to have an adventure as a young person. He met Louis Prima there briefly, but he's just loved Louis Prima. He's been singing like Louis Prima, doing Louis Prima impersonations his whole life. He got the part of Louis for Tailspin by singing "I Want to Be Like You" in the voice of Louis Prima. I mean, it's uncanny how much like Louis Prima he sounds. For Jim's most recent wedding party, he hired Louis Prima's band, and he asked them, "Hey, is it okay if we sing a Louis Prima song with me doing Louis?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So he sings like Louis Prima's part with the surviving members of his band, and after the gig, they're like, "Yo, man, you're pretty good. You want to tour with us?" And he's like, "I can't, man. I just got married. You played at my wedding." but I think that's so remarkable. I mean, the man is so gifted. Everyone on those shows was so gifted. The writers, the artists. I mean, you have these concept designers who are just coming up with all these incredible concepts. Cloud Kicker's airfoil. Who would have thought?
Right. We've had the pleasure over the last year. Our first year of podcasting we were kind of secluded, but in our second year we've kind of branched out and we've been reaching out to different people. And we've had the pleasure of having Katie Lee and Brian Cummings, Victor Cook on the podcast, and so we've started to get a little bit of the behind the scenes stories of the Disney afternoon and learned about that tight knit voice acting community, and then of course the animators and just all. It's so amazing to get the behind the scenes, because I found it fascinating when we started talking, and you were talking about pausing the shows because you had recorded them on VHS and pausing the shows to see who worked on them. I never thought of that as a kid, and so with a lot of the voice actors and a lot of the people who worked on the show behind the scenes, I didn't look at that at all until recently. And, I didn't know who Jim Cummings was until just a few years back. But talking with him and learning about the behind the scenes has become very important to me because of my, how much I love the shows and everything. But I think it's really neat that you've kind of always had that from the very beginning. You've been following along, and it's like, you were always into following these people and keeping up with what they were working on and their moves behind the scenes and everything. It's, man, I can't wait to read your book.
Oh, well, thanks, man. It's really like, I always wanted to be part of those people behind the scenes. I always wanted to be one of them. And, I went to NYU Film School. I studied animation. John Canemaker was my chief instructor. I took history of animation with the incredible John Culhane, who had written, even before I was a student of his, he had written the quintessential book on Fantasia. He'd written the book on Aladdin, the making of an animated series. His articles that he'd written for Newsweek and stuff were quoted all over other Disney books that I had. Like there's the Encyclopedia of Disney Characters, A to Z, written by an author named John Grant. So Culhane's in there, Canemaker's in there. I knew I had to go to NYU and study animation with these guys. So when I graduated with this degree, in a matter of months, I was working on a Disney show called Little Einsteins for the Disney Channel. And from there, I ended up working on as an animation artist for a Nickelodeon show called Wonder Pets, and I worked as an animator on Saturday Night Live. I stayed exclusively on the East Coast. I just didn't feel like going out west. I worked on some commercials. I worked on a couple films. The last big project I worked on was this feature film called Epic. And for like a flash in a pan, I was in the storyboard department on this feature film, Epic, for Blue Sky Studios, 20th Century Fox, which has now been bought by Disney in the last few days. So it was cool to talk to these folks with kind of, I would like to think, a basic understanding of what it's like to work in an animation studio, because I'd spent more than 10 years working in animation studios, and granted, mine were in the 21st century and theirs were in the 80s and 90s, and there were vast differences. For instance, the scripts for Wuzzles and Gummy Bears were all written on typewriters. All their research for how to, illustrate the grand places where the DuckTalks characters visit, those were all pulled from clip files and National Geographic issues, not Google search. So there were some vast differences and huge hurdles that these folks had to go through in order to make these quality shows that we have no choice but to take for granted now in the digital age. But there's a certain dynamic and a certain of flying by the seat of your pants that working in an animation studio gives you, especially if you work in television, which is almost exclusively where I worked. And you have a deadline, you have an air date, and you have no choice but to hit this air date. If anyone or if any listener out there on your podcast has ever worked for a newspaper or even a college newspaper, and you have to get an issue done by a certain time, you will stop at nothing. You will stay up late. You will pull up all-nighters, and not to do your papers for your classes, but to get this article out because you are passionate about this product that you're helping to create. That's what it's like to work at an animation studio in television. And you're trusting that the producers have made a schedule that is livable and that you're not being worked to the bone. And in the case of the early years of the Disney Afternoon, they were worked to the bone. Like Ken Kuntz had his arm in a sling from tendinitis. And he was just stuck writing on a script with one hand, typing on a typewriter with one hand while his other arm's in his sling. They just believed in the product. And when you have a lot of people sharing this common vision, it kind of creates a bond unlike anything else. You're all believing in one thing, and you believe that that this is quality and it's going to live on. I'd like to think. Now I'm sort of putting a little bit like grandiose romanticism onto it, but I would say it's safe to say that you're trusting that every member of this team is going to do their part and maybe a little bit more than their part just to make this vision come true. And that, I think, is the real Disney magic. There are no magic wands. There's no pixie dust. It's the fact that people believe in quality product, and the Disney magic, in essence, is quality product. That's all I have to say about that. I've rambled on plenty.
I do want to ask. I know that the topic, you're limited on what you can say. In the book, you do have an opportunity to cover the beginnings of the new DuckTales, the so-called reboot, the show from 2017. We've got, we're into the second season now. One thing that I did want to ask you about your experience with that was, and it's cool to hear that it's kind of what kickstarted your ability to make this book, to get Disney on board with it. What was that like, being able to, what kind of access did you have? How did you get to chronicle the beginning? Is that what's going to be in the book?
You're talking about for DuckTales 2017?
Yes.
For DuckTales 2017, I was able to interview the folks who got it started in depth. I spent some time at the studio and saw how they produced what they produced, just some quality stuff. And I was able to really get into the minds of people like Frank Angones and those really creative folks who decided to keep some old stuff and to create some new stuff. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to ask, was I there chronicling like a journal, each week? No, unfortunately, no. I was there for a single day and for some follow-up interviews. That was the extent of my presence there. But I'd like to think that I asked all the right questions.
It's really cool. I think it's awesome that they gave you access. I mean, because you're writing about the Disney Afternoon and chronicling these shows that, because I kind of see the new show as the legacy of those shows. They're kind of pulling a little bit, as actually a lot more than we anticipated in the beginning, from the various aspects of the shows. And it's really cool how it's branching out and giving us, just little tidbits. I remember the week that Gummy Bears shows up in season 1, and I mentioned it to my wife, and she didn't grasp what I was saying until I pulled up a YouTube clip with the theme song, and she was like, I remember watching that show. And so it's really cool that they're able to do that, but it's I just feel like it is a new renaissance, hopefully, for Disney Afternoon, and I'm glad you were able to include it in your book. So we're excited to have an opportunity to read about that as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm super delighted to. I mean, I wouldn't be able to really talk about the legacy without talking about what Frank and what Matt Youngberg and what like line producer Susanna Olsen deserves a lot of credit too. You know, Sean Jimenez as the art director for the show. I mean, these four people they're the pillars of what the new DuckTales is. And we look at Frank, Matt, and Sean on the creative side, and Susanna on the, I guess, production side, holding up the studio. What's remarkable is that they all are very serious about their corner of this production, and they know how to work together and what each other pillar needs in order to function. It's really like seeing a master like quartet at work, you know? Mm-hmm. So each one counts on the others, and like they know when to play their instrument a little bit louder. They know when to hang back and let the other instruments come in. You know, it's so beautifully collaborative that I was delighted to put it in. I couldn't write this book without it. I couldn't write this book talking about the legacy, talking about the people who were raised on these shows, without illustrating how these people who literally were raised on these shows. I mean, like Frank is one of the biggest fans of the original DuckTales. Like they're continuing the legacy. There are some diehard people out there who notice the changes between DuckTales 2017 and DuckTales 1987, and you know, I totally get it. Mm-hmm. I'm a purist as well, you know, and at the same time, you know, I think both DuckTaleses needs to be accepted independently. I don't think one can be thought of as a continuation of the other, just right, as inspired by the other. Just like the same way you're not going to say that the Carl Barks stories are the same thing as the 1987 DuckTales cartoon show. You can appreciate them both independently of each other and appreciate how one inspired the other. But you know, the Scrooge from the comics is not the Scrooge from the 1987 show. The characters in the comics are not quite the characters in the 1987 show. And the adventures they go on, even the 12 or so that were inspired by Barks's comics, are still adjusted for a television audience. You have to give that leeway. Even as a purist, I say this with my heart bleeding. I tell you, I'm a man who, as a kid, had a conniption when in Quack Pack, Donald Duck interacts with human characters. I mean, I'd rip my heart apart, you know? But, you know, for people who are purists, it's important to just like see these as two different corners of the universe and just love them each independently, because they have clearly worked hard to earn our love.
And one thing the new show definitely does, I love all the callbacks. I mean, I get, you know, I geek out about them. But I think the show really shines when it goes somewhere new. I think they've done an excellent job of kind of balancing that to where we get a little bit of the nostalgia, a little bit of, hey, remember this? Hey, you know, here's a little bit, and then going off into a completely different direction than I expected, but in an enjoyable way. And I agree, you got to disconnect in a way, because we do see those fans as well. You know, sometimes people have a little bit of trouble with, hey, they didn't spend enough time with this, or they didn't talk about that, or why is this not there? And it's a different show, and maybe they do come back around to that. Maybe we do get some more of that later, but you know, it is different, and I love it for that. I enjoy it. I think they're doing an excellent job. Obviously, yeah. I talk every week about the show on a podcast, so.
Cool. I think it's great that they made Darkwing a character. Mm-hmm. I think it's great that they brought Jim Cummings back to do Darkwing. I think it's terrific. I think it's fun that they have Don Carnage as a character.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd like to say that this is just me as a me and not me as a purist, that I still think that Jim Cummings can do a better Don Carnage than anyone on the planet. No offense to the current actor of Don Carnage. Jim Cummings just makes me, he can say anything and I'm laughing my butt off. He's just such a great improviser, and he just breathes so much life into that character. Half of the lines that Don Carnage says in Tailspin were improvised by Jim Cummings. I think he'll say this on a podcast too. He'll say, I'm either the world's worst memorizer or the world's best improviser.
That's great.
But he'll just start, he'll like disregard half of the script and just start making up lines, and they'll stay into the show. And he calls Don Carnage Disney's first Monty Python character.
That's awesome.
So if the new actor for Don Carnage can capture a Monty Python-esque quality, then I will shut the hell up about that. But until then, give me Jim Cummings any day of the week.
We really appreciate all of your time. Thank you for joining us. And I have one question before we go, though. We had one of our followers on social media, as soon as we started talking about your book, we put that out there on our blog. On social media, we had a response. I hope there's a chapter for Bonkers.
Oh, yeah. Of course. Of course. There's got to be a chapter for Bonkers. Every show from the Disney Afternoon has its own chapter. It's funny. You never know what show is someone's favorite. And just because, I'm a diehard fan of like the first 4 because I was there for the first 4. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that someone else's favorite show isn't Bonkers, or someone else's favorite show isn't the Mighty Ducks. I know people whose favorite show is the Mighty Ducks. Great. That's when I was already aging out. I was kind of, even Gargoyles, I decided not to watch. Unfortunately, I wasn't even in my 20s. I was only in my 20s when I started watching Gargoyles. And it has since become one of my favorite shows just across the board.
Oh, it's excellent. I remember watching Gargoyles. I think I missed Bonkers. I'm not sure when Bonkers came out. I know I've seen some of Bonkers, but I don't think I've ever seen a full episode. But I know there's people that love it, and I know that at the parks, it was part of the Disney Afternoon with the characters and the shows and everything. So I know it had to have had a good following.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think I had a hard time getting into Bonkers because there were like 2 different tones in the series. One tone was a little bit more dramatic, and the other tone was incredibly slapsticky. Yeah. And the dramatic ones you can tell because Miranda Wright, the female cop, is his partner, and the slapsticky ones, Lucky Pickell is his partner. and I remember being really confused, and I just didn't want to. I don't know. I didn't want to jump into a story without knowing exactly what happened to Bonkers and his partner, and why this tone is a little bit different. The book answers that question. Like, there's an answer to that question. And you might already know it, being a Disney Afternoon fan, but there might be a bunch of readers who don't. And there might be a bunch of readers who also wonder the connection between Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Bonkers.
I've heard that brought up a lot.
Yeah, it's no mystery. Like it was, but the question is, why didn't Bonkers come out sooner instead of like 5 years later?
Right.
And you'll find out why in the book. All your questions will be answered.
Well, I think that's an awesome way to end things, because we are picking up the book, and I'm sure most of our listeners will be as well. Before I let you go, let's talk about where people will be able to get a hold of the book and when the book will be out. Now, I know we first came across it on Amazon, and it shows that the release is in October. I don't know if that's a hard date or not. Sometimes those move.
I will say right now, it's a hard date.
Okay,
right
October
now,
the 15th.
Yes, right now that's a hard date. Saying this as of today. and late March 2019, I'm saying that October 15th is a day of release.
Yeah, awesome. That's going to be a big book day, because that is also the day that the second chapter of The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck is being released.
The Life and Time. Are you talking about like the graphic novel, like the trade paperback is going to be re-released?
Don Rosa's original Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. Fantagraphics holds the license for that now, and they're re-releasing it because really, if you want to buy that now, you got to go on eBay or all these other places where it's very expensive to get that. And this would be volume 2, which is all the supplemental stories to his original 12-chapter novel.
Right. That's funny. I never thought it was out of print.
It has been for a long time. It's being released. It's April, I think, is when volume 1 comes out.
Oh, wow.
And it's a hardcover. Okay. It's going to be hardcover format.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I got my copy, I don't know, a few years ago of Life and Times, and just the kind of dedication that Don Rosa has to Karl Barks' legacy is just remarkable. It was really an inspiration, actually. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tie those 2 points together and say that, like, having read his Life and Times and seeing how closely he stuck to the original source material and how much he just paid homage and building on that and creating this history and delving deep into this history and showing the character of Scrooge behind the events that we know. Like, that really inspired me to tell the story of the Disney afternoon from a nonfiction narrative style, taking the facts that I know and meeting the players of this incredibly exciting drama, and making it into something that is in itself a kind of live or die adventure. They didn't know at any given point if the TV animation division was going to remain or be defunct, at least during the first few years. Every one of these people was kind of an underdog. The studio itself was an underdog. And for a while, TV animation was doing a huge part in supporting the rest of the studio because DuckTales was big before Little Mermaid came out. So there was no like Disney feature film renaissance yet. There was no Disney had not been winning Oscars in a while. You had the Black Cauldron. The Fox and the Hound was nice, but the Black Cauldron was this huge project that took nearly 10 years to make that was missing the Disney magic. And then really you have Gummy Bears, DuckTales, Rescue Rangers supporting the studio. They were carrying on the Disney magic almost exclusively before the feature films bounced back with Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, etc. So it wasn't until then that TV animation really felt like it had a strong footing. But figuring out what it was like back in 1985, 86, and weaving these stories together, I was totally inspired by Don Rosa. I hope that makes sense, even though
absolutely.
Don Rosa dealt with fictional characters.
Oh, absolutely. I think I don't think you understand quite how much we're looking forward to reading the book.
Oh, well,
it's going to be great because we can't get all of this information in one place. When you start researching to talk about anything with the Disney Afternoon, we're all over the place on the web looking for details. And I don't know of any other collections. So we've really been looking forward to a contemporary collection of the stories. And you've talked to so many people and you've gotten your hands on pieces of the production. It's something we're going to pour over. No doubt.
Oh, I'm so glad. And the book, there's no way it can include all of the pieces of art, all the concept art. I mean, all of the documents that go into making any single one of these shows. It just goes on and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. And I just hope that we collectively as a global community make the additional images accessible to each other. Mm-hmm. Through blogs and through websites and Tad Stones' Facebook page and whatever it takes, because this book is it's just going to whet an appetite for this sort of thing.
That's great. Your book, The Disney Afternoon, The Making of a Television Renaissance, going to be put out by Disney Editions Deluxe, out October 15th. Everybody, you can go pre-order it on Amazon. Our blog, of course, we've got you taken care of. You can follow that link to get there. You can go search for it on Amazon. Bookstores, be on the lookout come October. It's going to be a great read. Jake, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Since I'm new to the social media thing, I thought I might just try and plug my Twitter, Instagram things.
That's a great idea. Why don't you tell people where they can find you? Yeah.
Sure. I am on Jake Loves Tunes. JakeLovesToons. That's on the Instagram and the Twitter.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you're going to get some followers from the people who listen to the podcast, and we'll be blogging about. We do Duck Merch is a segment of our podcast. So a little closer to time, we'll start reminding people that it's coming out. For those who haven't maybe pre-ordered yet, we'll be following along, and we'll definitely let you know when we get a hold of it and when we're able to start reading through it.
My pleasure, man. That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it. I hope you like it.
Thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great times. Oh, this was a great episode. We had a lot of fun speaking with Jake and just listening to him lay down some knowledge about the Disney Afternoon. Great stuff. I'm sure you enjoyed that. Make sure that you reach out to Jake over on social media. Let him know that you enjoyed hearing him on the podcast. Thank him for coming on. It's always great when you let our guests know that you enjoyed them on the podcast. You can find Jake on Twitter at Jake Loves Tunes. And don't forget to pre-order his book. If you're into the Disney Afternoon and you enjoyed this podcast, there's no doubt we're all going to enjoy this book as well. It is currently on pre-order at Amazon. So you want to look for Jake S. Friedman, or you could look for The Disney Afternoon, The Making of a Television Renaissance. This is being put out by Disney Editions. Currently, there are no images on Amazon for the book because it hasn't been approved yet. The book will be released on October 15th. We're looking forward to it. We have pre-ordered the book so that we can get a hold of it, and we'll definitely be talking about it on the podcast. Kind of like how we did things with Morgan Jekyll. If you remember, Morgan did the Don Rosa documentary. Kind of like how we did that. We'll make sure we're covering this release. Jake was great. We had some great conversations with him as we got ready for the podcast and after, and I've made sure I've given you the best of it. Hey, one thing that kind of got away from me and Pirate, and we had it at the bottom of our notes because we realized late that we should talk about it on March the 27th. But somehow we overlooked it, and we don't want this episode to go out without us taking a moment just to kind of reflect on Carl Barks. Today is March the 27th, and March the 27th is Carl Barks' birthday. He was born in 1901, and he passed away August 25th of 2000. Honestly, August 25th of 2000, that's before I really got into following these ducks close enough to know that Carl Barks was even a creator. I'm pretty sure I'd heard his name before, but around that time. But because I have always been a Donald fan, but I didn't really know who he was or what his influence was at Disney. And it wasn't until much later that I became more familiar with him. And then just to be honest with you, I think I've been honest about this from the beginning. It really wasn't until this podcast and some of the conversations that I've had with some other fans that I've started to realize the rich history that the Ducks have in comics. I mean, I always knew there had been comics, but I didn't realize that, like, for 50 plus years, these books have been published overseas with very little breaks. I mean, mainly just wartime. And then to find out about Don Rosa and Karl Barks and their influence outside of the United States, and then to get an opportunity to go through and read those stories, it's just been really amazing. And I've really come to appreciate Karl Barks. I've currently reading through Fantagraphics volumes for his comics, and I'm in the midst of trying to finish Volume 7, which is part of our Beyond DuckTalks series that we're doing. And we're staying behind on that, but we're not giving up. We're going to continue working on it. I'm almost done with it. I'm to the short stories, but I have to say Volume 7 definitely has some of my favorite Karl Barks stories, and I am seeing some of those connections with the later Rosa work. This volume includes Plain Awful, and that's such a great story and a lot of fun. But as I've learned more about Karl Barks, I've really started to really appreciate him as a creator. I really appreciate how much he enjoyed these characters and what all he put into them. And he's just, I often hear him called the good duck artist, and he does have exceptional art. I think it's the stories. I really think it's how much he cared about the characters and what he put into them that makes his work so great. And I've watched a few documentaries that I could find recently, and just such a great guy. And he just seemed like such a passionate guy who really enjoyed his art form. He found that even though he started off in the animation department, he found that comics were where he was able to spread his wings. And as a lifelong comic book reader, I really appreciate that. So we wanted to take a moment and just recognize that it is Karl Barks' birthday, or at least it was for you all as you're listening to this later. We're just very grateful for the work that he left us, and we hope you go and check out his work. But yeah, that's going to be it for this week. This episode's probably going to be a little late because I'm in the process of moving. I don't imagine I'm going to get it out all that quickly, but I feel like it's a great episode of the podcast, so I want to get it to you as quickly as possible. We've already let you know that Jake was on the podcast, and people are interested in the book. So, I'm glad you got to listen to it. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know. Don't forget that throughout the week, we're posting blogs at DuckTalks.com, and pretty much those are our show notes. That's the whole reason why the blog was started, was to keep up with the information that we wanted to talk about on this podcast. So you can go there and read the blogs that we post. And you can also follow us on Twitter at DuckTalks. We have a lot of fun on Twitter. That's kind of our main arm of our social media. Pirate and I both manage that, and we both got kind of different flavors to our tweets. And it's kind of fun when people are guessing to see who it was that tweeted what. And I think a lot of people have started to pick up on it. It's fun. But also, don't forget to email us. We had some emails recently, so thank you for those emails. And you can email us at ducktalkspod@gmail.com. There's no ad at the beginning. I don't know how to say email addresses on the podcast. It always feels weird. ducktalkspod@gmail.com. And you can use that for anything, really. I mean, we've had people email us, letting us know about something they saw or an event they went to, an experience that they had. Sometimes we have people email us with questions, and sometimes we have people email us with suggestions that actually do make it into the show. So, Duck Talks is something that we made to enhance the conversation in the duck community. And that's exactly what we want to do. So we love that interaction. We love when you're communicating with us. Let us know what you think about the show, what you'd like to see us do. And we do enjoy getting your feedback. Might be a week or two before we're back. Don't know yet. Probably shouldn't say that, but I'm going to, just to be honest with you. I'm in the process of this move. As you all know, Josh and his wife have had a little baby, and so he's very busy. And Pirate's just waiting on us to get our stuff together so that we can sit back down behind the microphone. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Till next time, stay glom golden, people. Breathing through my nose because the mic doesn't pick it up as much. Breathing out through my mouth so that it does. Hold on. Hey there. Well, I'm going to say the same thing. It's the inflection I'm trying to change.
Got it. Okay.
Just so you know.
Yep.
I don't want to sound like Liquidator.
Hey there.
Yeah.
Hey there, honey. Who there?
Well, okay, so the hey there. No, I'm not going to explain this now. Ask me tomorrow. We've got my note says fenders. Hold on. We've got hold on.